Good to see you again. And Jeff Ellison, hi. Is Robbie with us tonight?
No,
Okay.
she's not. Just
Okay.
me.
Just so we'll take you. Joel and company, welcome. Steve Zimmerman is there. Hi. Risa, good to have you with us. And Brad and Karen Ellison, good to see you. Who do we have? Arlene Warchel, welcome. The Schwimmers, I hope, are both on board.
Hello, Jim. We are. Hi.
Hi. Okay. If your hair isn't done tonight, you don't have to show your camera.
Oh, I thought it was on video. Oh, there it is.
You're on different ones, yeah.
It's coming on.
Okay, there you go. Oh my God.
Yes.
Okay, left, right, and center, and Arthur's on the right now, of course, from our perspective. Steve Greenberg, welcome. Good to have you back. Barbara Heckman, welcome. Not sure if we've had you. Barbara, you have two windows open, so you might want to close one of them. Otherwise, we'll get feedback when you talk. And Natalie, welcome. And let me see if I can do something. Marina, there's Natalie. Hi. Marina, if you could close one of Barbara Heckman's windows, that would be helpful.
Sure.
Probably the one that says, well, they're both muted.
They're both the same next to each other.
Yeah, at the bottom. Okay. Well, we have a full house tonight, don't we? Oh, hi, Barbara. You want to unmute yourself, Barbara? Lower left corner, the red microphone with a line through it. Just click it once. Arlene, hi. Good to see you again. Okay, if you figure that out, oh, there you go. Hi. Okay, but Barbara, close your other window.
Okay, I'm leaving that room. This is a new experiment. I lost my camera, so I'm using my tablet, and it's a new thing for me. So bear with me.
Okay. Miriam and Marvin, hi. Glad to have you with us. Glad you saw the movie.
Aviva and Maya are on their way to Rwanda tomorrow.
Oh, right. Well, I hope, I know they connected online with my
They
nephew
connected,
Josh.
yeah, but they
That's going
couldn't
to be
go
a
to
great
the
connection.
they couldn't go to the resort because they already prepaid the hotel.
Oh, well, no, that's okay. They wouldn't want to pay for the resort. My nephew runs a resort in Kigali, and Aviva, Risa's daughter, and her daughter are going there. What is Mia is photographing? Maya is photographing surgical procedures.
Yes, yeah, she's in the surgical suites doing that, and also with some of the families when Aviva's working with them.
Yeah. Okay, and what's the organization that brings them all together?
Well, I don't know. It's a foundation of some kind.
Okay. All right. Well, that's great that she's doing that. It'll be a good summer thing for both of them to do together.
Yeah.
All right, Barbara. So tell us how you came to the group. I'm not sure we've talked before. Barbara Heckman.
Yes, we do, from university.
Oh, you're breaking up on
Well,
us.
a lot of your members were going during last year on a Saturday night, and I wasn't available then. So I was so thrilled to hear when you changed it to Thursday.
Well, my wife echoes your opinion because now I'm free on Saturday nights. So let's jump into the movie. Did people like it? Was it too lightweight? I want you to know it was Canada's nominated film for Best Foreign Oscar in 2011. It's 12 years old now, and I think it's great that they did a film about the unspoken, which is really the theme of it, and about how we're so politically correct we don't talk about things that are really important to us. So let's talk about the secrets and the unspokenness without revealing everything now. We first meet Monsieur Lazhar. He walks into the principal's office. And did you believe him that he was a teacher when he first walks in?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hello, Howard and Suzanne. Yeah, I did too. You don't know what's coming, and he gives her a packet that has his CV in it, and it looks all very academic. And then you see him the next day, he's teaching in class. So the decision was made to bring him on. A little sudden, but the principal was feeling the pressure to fill the void, not because she needed to teach, but she needed to resume the momentum of the children in the class who lost their teacher. So he has a very winning way, doesn't he? Didn't we all like him in the beginning? He explains his name and that he's Algerian. He's fully disclosing everything. You don't believe him in class. When is your first, anybody want to chime in with this? Oh, is he really a teacher because he reads them Balzac? Balzac for the dictation. And it's too complex French for them. You know, they're 10, 11 years old. He's over teaching them because he's not really a teacher, but we don't know that yet. He just seems to be new and overly ambitious in his new job. By the way, you'll notice when he takes his seat at the deceased teacher's desk, there's a laptop there, and he tries to put it away in a drawer because he's not going to use it, but it won't fit. There's one of those little details that sort of give us a clue to his experience. And then the first important thing happens. Simon, the young boy, walks Alice home. They were obviously friends before. We saw that in the snowy courtyard, the playground scene at the very beginning of the film. And he offers her a picture. Now, it's not on there for very long, and we see it again later in the film. But who wants to describe what the picture was of? Did anybody catch it at that time? It's a picture he took of Martine, just like he took a picture of Monsieur Lazhar on his first day. And what happens? He tries to give it to Alice, and what does she do? She rejects it. She said, "This is perverse. You know, you shouldn't, she's dead. I don't want to be reminded of that. Take it back." There's a detail on that picture. And you didn't notice it then, but you notice it later. I'm going to ruin it for you now. Simon had drawn angelic wings on the teacher, on Martine. So it's like she's now in heaven. She's with the angels. She was an angel. I loved her. There's a very loaded message in that picture, and they should have made more of it when they put the scene together. But having seen the film 2 or 3 times, it's clear. But that's not fair to first-time viewers because you didn't see the wings the first time, I don't think.
Oh, we saw.
You did notice? Okay.
Sure.
Oh, okay. Oh, all right. Then I'm the one who's slow on the uptake. Sorry. But it's interesting that there's this hostility between Alice and Simon, and it's not really explained. It's clear she's hurt as well as he is hurt. And we see, the information in this film is parceled out to us kind of slowly. He goes to the UPS store and he picks up a parcel. And the clerk says, "Oh, I like that kind of marmalade as well. It's my favorite." Of course, we later learn it's not marmalade. It's something from home in Algeria. And then we see the next big step. That's Lazhar with his immigration attorney. New scene for us. And what do we learn? We learn he's an immigrant and he has an immigration hearing. And it makes him a little bit suspect. He does say he's able to work in Quebec. But we don't get the whole picture there. It's a rehearsal for what to say in front of the interview board at the immigration office. So he's being coached to win his status. That's all we know of it. And that happens 30 minutes into the film. So you can see the film is taking its time to sort of get us into the flow of things at school. And there's hints at all is not what it seems to be. There's a scene with the custodian and the gym teacher, the only two men at the school, and they're sizing him up to see what kind of guy is he going to be for us and keep us company. And it's not clear what that scene is. They first say they witness him talking to Claire, the drama coach, and they say, "You like her, don't you?" And he says, "Oh, no, I don't really fancy her at all." Kind of cute. It's like they're teasing him a little bit. And he leaves them. And then we go to the first immigration office scene where Lazhar faces his interview. What did you think of that interview? Was it tough? Was it biased? Was it discriminatory? Did it feel like some migrant from Venezuela on the Florida border, Texas border? How did you react to that? Wasn't familiar? Arthur, you're looking like, gee, I can remember when I was in the immigration.
I'm trying to recollect a particular scene. I thought the Inquisitor was just very direct.
Yeah.
I didn't perceive any bias.
Okay, but he was tough, and so was the woman. There were two of them. They asked tough questions. Well, how do you know it was terrorist violence against your family? Well, it was, and then finally, they force him to tell the details of the death, where the apartment that his wife and daughters remained was firebombed. And let me get rid of my daughter's text. And pretty gruesome stuff. Suddenly, there's this huge empathy for Lazhar. When he admits that he fled the country, and that he ran a restaurant, right? His wife was the political one. She wrote the book on, or the article on something that was critical of the Algerian government. Somebody had it in for her. And
but she was also a teacher, Jim.
She also was a teacher, yes. But she was vocal. She was in the opposition to the government. So suddenly we realize, we didn't know this about him. So this is Lazhar's secret, isn't it? Right? There are other secrets. It's not just that he's an immigrant, but he's coming with trauma, lost his whole family. And he knows it was domestic terrorism, that somebody in the country had it out to get them. And it was a warning to other vocal opposition people. And, but he couldn't prove it. And the two people, remember, these immigration authorities are trained to be doubters. They're trained to ferret out the fakers. So skepticism is part of their job. So it's not quite fair to say that they're drawn as evil, biased people, but they can come off like that because you're guilty as a foreigner until you're proven to have a decent cause to come here. So it's not like you have a cause to come here and we'll have to disprove it. Miriam? You're muted, dear. Lower left corner, please defeat your mute.
Jim, you just said you're guilty as a foreigner until you could prove yourself innocent.
Well, right.
Wait, excuse me. I just need to make a further point.
Okay.
I found such a lack. I mean, it was a very good movie and I enjoyed it, and I'm very glad you recommended it. I found such a lack of empathy on the part of everybody when they found out that this man's wife and child, and maybe other children, that wasn't clear to me, but surely the wife and the daughter were both murdered, bombed, burned to death. And he walks around every single day with this in his heart, and nobody's empathetic to him.
But nobody knows but the immigration.
I'm so sorry, Mr. Lazhar. Yeah. Not one human being says anything. Yeah. It's like he's reading some kind of a story to them, which does not pertain to him.
Okay. Here's the thing, Miriam. I think you're getting ahead of what the other characters in the story were meant to know. You know that he has this tragic past. You know he's a sincere, sensitive man who's harboring great grief. His facade at the school is, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm a legitimate teacher. I'm a legitimate immigrant. Hire me. Nobody knows it at the school until much later. Much later. So
And
that's why.
Why is that? Why is that something that needs to be hidden?
Well, he's illegal. He doesn't have his permanent residency status in Canada yet. Right? He can't work and get a decent job. He figures this is a tragic situation. It's hard to find teachers. Maybe he could weasel his way in there and work. He needs the money, but he needs the connection. We'll come back to what the school represents to him. It's connection with his own children whom he lost, and to his wife who was a teacher. It's also, he's a lonely guy and doesn't know anybody else in the city. He has no other friends. He's totally dumb when Claire, the drama teacher, wants to make nice with him, and he's immune to other people's warmth, yet he exudes it in front of the children. He extends himself every scene we see him in that classroom, trying to reach them to join their jokes. He says, what if you married that guy? You both have hyphenated last names. Would the children have 4 last names? You know, and they get the joke. So he reads other people. He has what we call in psychology circles, an emotional IQ, emotional intelligence, to read and feel what other people are feeling. So, but the point you bring up is valid in that why are the other teachers, mostly the principal and the gym teacher and the custodian, why are they so cold towards him? You and I aren't cold towards Lazhar in the first 45 minutes of the film. We like him. We empathize with him. We're on his side. So I think that's the source of your anger at the other characters, but they didn't know. So here's one case where silence isn't the fault of the person who's silent, because they didn't know. The silence is Lazhar's because he's hiding his shame and the fact that it would jeopardize his position at the school if he told him, I don't have working papers, and so on and so on, you know, and it's hard, you know. You meet somebody in the supermarket and say, how's your family? What's he going to say? No, my wife and 2 daughters were just burned. You know, everything's fine. It's you have to see things from his point of view as well, especially in the beginning of the film. Does that help explain the coldness? Okay, Brad.
Okay.
Well,
I didn't win you over yet, but we will.
I'd want to say that he represents, even though he's a fellow teacher, quote unquote, even though he's speaking French, he is the other.
Yeah.
His French is not the same French as their French. He speaks a very perfect French, not a Canadian French. So first of all, there's this language issue. And whereas as a teacher, he uses the methods that he were applied to him when he was a student in French Algerian schools.
What do we call that method?
In other words, the orderly classroom, the use of dictation. Dictation is no longer used in French schools, but that was what that's the way he was taught, was through dictation. And of course, choosing Balzac, of all people, for these 11-year-olds was very other than, you know, not at all what they were used to. When he hits that kid on the head, gives him a little slap on the head, that's exactly how he was taught when he was a child. So, yes, he appears to be a teacher, and yes, he's speaking the same language as they speak, and yet he's still the other.
You're right. That's a very good observation. Regarding the smack on the head, when the principal confronts him about touching students, I thought she was going to bring that up. And he says, I never touched anybody, because he doesn't perceive that as a touch, you know, but in today's, or the PC world of 2011, it was perceived as that, even in Canada, or maybe especially in Canada, or in French Canada. So it's really a conflict of cultures is what you're pointing to. He is the other, and he doesn't know. But what do we know? Rather than what do we know about him, what do we feel about him? Aren't we on his side all the time, even though we learn he's been deceiving us?
Yes.
Arlene?
Yeah, I was on his side all the time.
Mhm.
And when the inspectors had asked him if he had abandoned his family when he left, he had to explain to them that he didn't abandon. He went ahead to set things up for when they were coming. And I think that helped his case too.
Yeah. Now, doesn't this sound like a lot of Jewish immigrants to the United States or to other countries in the pre-war era? You know,
It does.
my family came just after my father's family came after the First World War, and Uncle Lou was the first one to come over. And 2 years later, he was established in Cleveland and sent for his brother Leon and Leon's family. You know, this is how it works, how it always worked for any immigrant. You know, the oldest son goes first and then brings the rest of the family. We see it in many cultures. And that sort of establishes his credibility as well. So it's like, it almost doesn't matter who he is. We feel his innocence and sincerity. We trust him. He may do the wrong thing, like read Balzac, but he's not mean to the kids, you know. and he's like, he meets with our approval as, you know, liberal, progressive parents and grandparents who realize that children are people too, you know, and they just want the same respect that you demand as an adult. So let's move on. And then we see after that, after he describes the deaths of his family, he opens up the box that was sent to him. And we see stamps that his wife used, you know, colored ink stamps. And this has been a theme in the movie, that there's not enough color in his classroom. He's not bringing enough passion to it. This later comes back to bite him when he brings real passion to it and then gets chastised for it. But the stamps are a symbol of her and her teaching style. There is a montage of all in the very beginning of the film, there's a montage of the posters that were once up on the wall. And then we have a little montage of painting the walls a totally different color, that robin's egg blue. Mm. And there is a scene where he confronts the principal. Can't we change another room? And he says, yeah, but then the other kids will know that was the room where the teacher hung herself. So there's logic, but she's a little insensitive. You know, what you long for is a more understanding principal, but she's a bit overwhelmed with the situation because she has parents on her case. Did the Jaspins want to say anything? I saw a hand up. Yeah.
I was on his side from the beginning because he was the only one that sort of wanted to address the elephant in the room, the suicide. And I was wondering when this supposedly took place, because it seems that they were very insensitive to a therapist being there or some kind of support for these children and what they had witnessed. And I thought he was the only one, and maybe because of his loss, he felt more compassion for them and wanted to talk about that. And he was shot down time and again.
What we saw in that was institutional medicine or trauma treatment. You know, they all know, oh, a tragedy happened, we have to send in the trauma expert to deal with the kids. And then a father wisely says, what, there's 20 kids in the classroom and only one therapist? Is that enough? And then I loved her answer because that establishes her as a true bureaucrat. She says, oh, no, we have enough. She doesn't say that. She says, oh, we're going to look at the situation again and deal with it as it is needed. So she totally dodges the question while appearing to be understanding. And that's corporate speak. That's government speak.
And I thought the two children they both had seen, he said to her very shyly, you saw? And that was what brought them together. And yet they lacked the skill to talk about it. I thought that drove them, pulled them together and yet drove them apart.
Kept them apart. Yeah, and that's why she rejected the photo. It's a good point, but you see, they're 11 years old. And when nobody else around them is talking about it, it's harder for them. Despite the therapist saying, are you feeling any fears or whatever, we didn't really see the therapist talking to the students. I think excluding him was like a total act of institutional medicine. Keep the door open a crack so you can hear, eavesdrop, and you should know what these kids are feeling because you're teaching them. It's so tone deaf in terms of what the children really need and what a good teacher needs to assist them. Jeff Ellison, we got to hear from you because you're a teacher of middle school kids too.
What really struck me is it's almost as if the director had been a teacher at some point, because they really understood how schools operate. A principal there was the suicide, but her concern is the room space, the number of classrooms and so forth. The men first respond to him by being so excited there's another male in the building, because in that grade levels, most of the time, women are the dominant people in the school. And you'll notice that the principal was also a woman. And I got a kick out of the social worker, because at every school I've been in, they're terrible. The social workers are awful. And the teachers actually know better how to deal with certain students than the social worker does. And so I felt very much like this person, it's the closest thing I've seen to how real classrooms, how they work. And you'll notice at the beginning how the kids really were giving him a tough time. And he began to understand it and adapt to it and realize it and change, which is what happens in schools. And the way that the kids can really kind of like eat you up, which is what they were doing when he was doing the Balzac poem transliteration. So anyway, that's one of the things that grabbed me, is that this is somebody that really knows how schools work.
And yet he's not a trained teacher. He's just an intuitive human being.
Right.
Maybe this is what kids need after all. Forget about social theory or developmental theory or political correctness. That's too abstract. Kids are kids. They need to feel it. And you'll note that he responds to their criticism. He goes along with their humor. He accepts their mocking of him. So, the guy can take a joke. He's not so bad after all. So he ingratiates himself to them, not because he's figuring it all out. That's who he is. He said, well, I got to be friends with him, so I'll be friends. Okay, Risa, did you have something to say? And then
Well,
Miriam.
When I taught middle school, and I was a math teacher at the middle school level, and then at all different kinds of levels, but I was criticized for parenting rather than teaching.
That came up.
Get so close to the kids and worry about. I was more worried about why they didn't do their homework than that they didn't do their homework, because I wanted to know what was going on when they got home. And so I was criticized by the principal for that.
Yeah.
And I think that's what he was. I think that's what he was doing. He was teaching, but he was parenting them. He was more interested in the whole child.
That came up in the film where a parent says, you're here to teach them, not to raise them.
Right.
But of course, the social science theory in this country has been, oh my God, these kids are coming to school hungry. We better give them breakfast so they can concentrate, before their blood sugar hits zero. So it's like, we have a mechanistic approach to it only until we get the scientific verification of what the kids really need. Do we begin to help them, even if it's for the wrong reason? Sure, they should be fed. but most importantly, they should be attended to. And when the parenting is lacking in the home, the state has to make up for it. Sorry, any of you, people who disagree with me, but we have a social and moral obligation to take care of each other. And we have been sold a bill of goods in this country, excuse me for getting on the soapbox now, that we can all take care of ourselves. And we can't. If the world's too complex, poverty is too insidious and too widespread. The fiscal conservatives say, and the free market economy thinkers say, a rising tide raises all boats. And my cliched response is, yeah, but the boats have to float. If they have holes in them, if you have kids who are breathing bad air and not eating food or eating bad food and, are living in a lead-laden, polluted environment, you can't uplift them. You have to make sure that everybody, it's about equal opportunity. And people who are born into poverty, generations of poverty, are disadvantaged. And that's why the recent racial admissions policy by the Supreme Court is wrong. They think that you have to ignore all racism to defeat the racism that is rampant. And it's just, Thomas and Roberts just don't get it. And it's really sad, and you ask any kid who grew up in the projects, hungry, with a single mom, and it's like they don't have a chance. They've never seen a doctor by the time they get to school, and the school nurse says, oh, you have tonsillitis, or whatever. Society is too complex for us to let individuals slide by unnoticed. And that's like saying the society is so complex, let's make gross decisions like everybody should be vaccinated. Well, when you're dealing with 400 million people, that's your goal. But society is so complex that we don't treat them like 1 to 400 million. We treat what the individual needs too. And unfortunately, there are tens of millions of kids who are hungry. So this
and yet,
yeah,
this was the opposite of that, because the school itself the families appeared to be fairly wealthy. The classrooms were small. So this was a problem of not the poor, but the more privileged.
Yes, you're right.
In that sense. And I can't agree with Risa more about schools and their operation. And I thought what was so interesting also, which is a big thing in schools today. A few years ago, we were told not to hug kids anymore.
Yeah.
The physical contact, because it can be misinterpreted in some way. And not to have any physical contact. Well, if you're a teacher, there are times that you just want to wrap your arms around students when they get something, or they achieve some sort of revelation. And to deny that to teachers is such a travesty. It didn't last long at a Jewish day school. I mean, the next year we were back to hugging kids and so forth. But whoever did this knows schools and the operation and what goes on within the school walls. And the parent-teacher conference was just, it was dead on.
Well, let's talk about that, Jeff, because it's like, aren't these the same parents who say, I'm going to teach my own kid about sexuality, or I don't want you teaching them about trans children, or they're too young to hear that, and or no sex education in high school. It's like, aren't these the same parents who, in their own way, are subject to secrets and denial and aren't servicing their own children at home? I'm not saying all of them, but it's like we have to provide an environment where we don't sweep these things under the table, because those hormones are raging among the kids and that curiosity is raging. Plus, we have such a sexualized culture in images, in content. Not that these kids are, going to X-rated movies, but look at commercials on television and music. It's like this stuff is there, and if you don't address it, it's going to go awry. And it's sort of you put your finger on it. These are the kinds of people who want to ban Elie Wiesel's books, or My Friend Has Two Mothers. It's like they resent the intrusion into their personal lives. But we all need help. I don't want to resort to Hillary's "It Takes a Village," but there is that sense that society itself cannot continue to be so demure that we ignore what's staring us in the face. Risa?
Schools today, from very young up through graduate students, have now taken the attitude that they can criticize the teacher. They have taken over the classroom. It's a terrible time to be a teacher.
Yeah.
In classrooms right now, all the way up to the students that we're involved with at this point, which are the HUC rabbinic students and the education students, who are reporting their professors for giving too much homework in graduate school. Why do we have to read this much? And teachers who have been teaching for many, many years at HUC and have been giving the same assignments all these years are now getting criticized for overworking these graduate students. And it's happening that teachers are walking off the job because of this, because they're harassed by the students and the parents. So it's really turned. And it's a very difficult time to be in the class.
It's a problem in academia too. It's scaring career teachers away. And I have a couple stories I won't burden you with, but to those people, you say, well, how much of the reading of medical students do you want your future doctor to ignore? It's like, leave it to the professionals who know what the training needs to be. And granted, we're talking about high school or middle school kids. That's different. The parents should be involved, but the parents need to be educated to the needs of minorities, to the needs for inclusion. One more thing, and then Brad, you can go. They found, in terms of diversity, social science research, not that I think all sociologists are valid, that when a room is mixed with different people of different backgrounds, races, and ethnicity, the dialogue is much broader and has the potential for having more an effect on diverse members. Whereas when the room is more homogeneous, not a lot gets done. There are no alternate points of view. So the conclusion was that white people benefit from hearing what Black people have to say, or Puerto Ricans have to say, or Puerto Ricans benefit from what Asians have to say. It's all part of education and opening up your own perspective to a more worldly perspective. But again, it's an uphill fight. This is part of the culture war. These many people, especially in the red states, only want to teach like Lazhar wants to teach Balzac by dictation. It's only what they knew is valid today. Despite the fact that, there are new weapons and new diseases and, that need to be dealt with in new ways and changing population demographics. So it's really, this film is calling out a lot of places where society is stuck, by this big silence of what's unspoken. Let's continue on. Somebody wanted to say something, Brad? And
yeah, I just wanted to bring the discussion back to the immigrant issue, because I think that's key to this movie. Mr. Lazhar, he wants to fit in. He wants to assimilate. You probably didn't notice this, but at the school, two individuals, a student and one of the adults, address him in Arabic.
yes,
And he refuses to speak Arabic to them. He says, speak to me in French. So he's already attempted to move from his Algerian roots to fit in to a more French culture. And now here he is in Canada, and we see him observing other teachers and the way they do things. And we see him moving away from the approaches that he used, that were used on him when he was a student, to a more American Canadian approach to youth, which is to not be so strict and to be more in touch with the emotional needs of the child. And what's so tragic about this movie is that he does a very good job of transitioning, of becoming more Canadian in that respect, and yet it backfires against him at this school. You know, he becomes much like the other teachers at the school in terms of his attitude towards the emotional health of his students, which is, you know, if you know anything about French education, you know that's the last thing that they care about. All they care about in the French system is achievement. So he's made that assimilation, and yet it gets him into trouble, which is the tragedy of the film.
Well, you know, thank you for calling out those scenes. There's one scene where he's in the hallway and he looks in another classroom, and a woman teacher, she's using the Socratic method to evoke responses from the students and ask them for feedback. Likewise, when he sees Claire directing the clever play that she's directing the students in, he thoroughly enjoys that, and he gets it. He gets the playfulness of it. So I think with the skills he has, he does fit in, because one, he gets the confidence from his students, his own students, who begin to like him and let him feel that. But he is trying to assimilate. My father, when he came to this country in 1920, was told by his older brother, who dictated, that the whole family would stop speaking Yiddish in the house, only English. Very common sentiment. We want to assimilate. We're here because we're running away from something horrible. And this change of identity will do us good and allow us to succeed here where we couldn't back there. But let's move on, because we're just getting into the juicy parts of the film. We come to Martine's message. Did I get that right? He's reading a note. One of the students, I think it's oh, you know, it was Alice's note about Martine and the loss. And he wants to distribute the note that Alice wrote to her own class among the rest of the school. And the principal says, no way. The way we're going to deal with this is to not confront it directly. No, forget it. You're absolutely wrong. Steve Zimmerman, did you have something to say?
Well, yeah, I thought that was a really crucial point in the movie. Although I agreed, to tell you the truth, with the principal's position on not distributing it in the act of psychotherapy. Mm-hmm. The kids were already depressed and numb from what happened, and they were confused by her comments because they couldn't process them. Right. And there would have been sort of widespread confusion and certainly.
Nobody was talking about it. They couldn't really talk about it.
That's the thing. You can't do that in the absence of the therapy for the students, and that wasn't going.
Yeah, I don't mean to be critical of the principal's decision, no. But you see, that was his effort to reach out to all the other students, because he's not a professional teacher. Right. So what it shows us is his sincerity. You know, this is meaningful stuff. We have to talk like this with the students. That right. and the principal didn't get it.
Yeah, I think his you know what his goal was good. What he what he wanted to try to accomplish was good, but there wasn't the context to make it successful.
Now, also in the faculty meeting,
Can I just say one thing? I
Yeah.
think that if this is making a statement about education, for example, the statement is that he became a great teacher at the end of the film. He had no background in education. He didn't go through all the coursework. He became a great teacher because he was authentic to himself. As he grows and develops, that there's an authenticity to him that the kids really glom onto. And I don't know, that's part of the message, a strange message of this film, that, you know, what makes a great teacher? And it isn't necessarily somebody that's gone through all the education classes. It's something different, and he had it, whatever that was, and he developed it and cultivated it.
his growing relationship with the students gave him the courage to extend himself, not knowing the traditional tools for doing so. And of course, it gets him into trouble. But
And I just want to say, Steve,
Can I ask a quick
I
question?
disagree
hold
with
on, Mary.
Steve.
Let Jeff finish. Go ahead.
I disagree with Steve. I think that should have been discussed. That silencing things like this doesn't work.
I
It
wasn't
was a
saying
particular letter.
And there needed to be a fuller discussion
right.
with the entire school and all of the students about the tragedy that took place with this teacher, and that it needed to be unsilenced and not silenced.
I agree, but you have a bureaucratic environment, and that you can't inject that into a bureaucratic environment that won't foster the discussion successfully.
Because it's out of your control. You don't know how the many different students are going to react to that little
And
essay
they're
she
going to go
wrote.
back to their parents and say, this is what happened, and the parents are going to be outraged because there isn't, you know, the whole thing isn't, you know, put together properly.
So Lazhar is acting, I don't want to say on impulse, but out of his compassion for the children. This is how we should be talking to them. Instead of, he didn't really mean, he meant let's distribute it, but that's because he didn't know how to persuade the principal to broaden the discussion, and that this is what the children need, is an outlet like this. So it's not just about the letter, the essay. It's about the outreach and the open discussion that the whole school community needs to have. Did somebody have a question?
Yes,
Mary.
I do. Just a simple technical question. What was the reason he had to be dismissed so abruptly and could not finish out the school year?
Because somebody investigated and found out he wasn't a licensed teacher.
Oh,
After the hearing, there's a public hearing, so there's a record of it. She found out. It's not reported as to how she found out, but she found out. And there was a lot of heat placed on her to dismiss him. And remember, she said, I'm going too, but at least they're giving me till the end of the year.
and now why was she going?
Because she let it happen. They blamed her for hiring him in the first place.
She was being fired because of him?
Yes. Every bureaucracy needs a scapegoat, right? So the leaders don't say, this was our failure to help these traumatized students. Blame it on somebody so that deflect the attention off of us. You know, it's Biden, it's the Wuhan viral center in China. It's, you know, the Pizzagate pedophiles in the basement, you know, in Washington. It create a boogeyman, create an other that allows people to give shape, even if it's a spectral ghost-like shape, to something, to displace their animosity and to assuage their fears, that you've given some tangible feeling to what's distressing them, a way of coping with it, even if it's a fiction. This is what's wrong. Sorry, I had to lay that all on you, but I think it's really, you know, It's what good films like this do for us and to us. They bring up subjects that are very much part of how we live and what we face. So just after this, by the way, we're at 45 minutes into the movie. That's half its length. So now things really begin to happen. There was a faculty meeting where finally the faculty lets Lazhar know. Oh, she was tutoring him. She hugged him. He claimed she kissed him. It was a disaster. Oh my God. That's what's bothering everybody. Everybody knows this. Everybody has their own explanation for it, except Lazhar. So it's like, oh my God, the conspiracy did exist. The conspiracy to keep this silent. Did she kiss him? Would that have been awful? That's still a mystery that's going to be solved later. That happens 46 minutes in, where Alice reveals more specifically what happened. And then what happens with the parents, they say to him, the nuances of child rearing escape you. Just train them, teach them, we'll raise them. And right again, after that, 4 scenes in a row, where he talks to this the psychologist, he says, we'll take care of this. And he walks away, and some child has placed a fish on his back, a decal. Did you catch that? It's actually one of the pieces of advertising art. It means they're playing with him. They're not ridiculing him. They feel free enough to play a prank on him because they know he's not going to get too upset. So that fish is actually a sign of their trust of him. Right? Even it's not really mean at all. So I thought that was very telling. And that's when he looks at the other classrooms and he sees the color. He goes down the hallway and he sees the other teacher doing Socratic work with the kids. He sees color on the walls, and he goes home and he opens up the box and finds his wife's colored stamps that she used for her class. And then he comes back and he gives Alice books to read. I think, I don't know if she's given him the Fable book. Yeah, sorry, that comes later. So that outreach, is a way of connecting with Alice in particular. And yes, she's his favorite. There's no question about that. There's a boy with migraines, Boris, and he puts a banana and a candy bar on his desk after he opens the desk. I don't know where that came from, whether it's from Lazhar or from inside the desk, but it's a signal. I was here and I care about you. He says, go outside and get some fresh air. You'll feel better when you come back. And that's when Lazhar sees the rehearsal, and that's what Claire is directing. And then the next scene is there's Arabic music coming from the playroom down below, and he starts dancing. And this is something he's doing just for himself. So yes, Brad, it's his Arabic roots, it's his culture he's comfortable with. And then Claire walks in and sees him, and forces him to go to the party. So they go, and then the fight breaks out between the two boys. We don't know what the fight is about yet. We sort of heard it from Alice earlier. But at 1 hour and 5 minutes, the secret is fully exposed. That Martine hugged him and he said she kissed him. And then Simon and Alice have an encounter on the stairs where she's very mean and cold to him. It's your fault, basically, which is a guilt that Simon has been carrying for so long. And he hits the other boy because the other boy is referring to it without saying it. So you see how these unspoken grudges and blames and these individual stories we create for ourselves that may not really apply to the situation hurt other people. We storm the Capitol building, because we're fighting for a lie that somebody else told us. This is human nature. We're vulnerable. And Simon, the only tool he has left at that point is to hit the guy and push him against the lockers. And then he discovers his wife's book of fables. And it's Martine's book of fables. It's not his wife's. And her husband, who never showed up after the suicide to claim her belongings, has been described in the book. Maybe you can read one of these fables every week to your students. So he looks at the fable and he say, oh, maybe I could do this instead of Balzac. And they could take that dictation a lot more easily. And then he goes to dinner with Claire in her apartment. And of course, the other teacher couldn't show up, and Claire clearly has designs on Lazhar, Bashir. He doesn't get it. You know, he likes the wine, but at the end of it, she presses him to tell his own story. So in a way, he's had his wings clipped about how not to get involved. And she's saying, but this is important. They need to know who you are. We need to know who we all are. How she's survived in that school, I don't know either. As a drama teacher, she's about reaching the emotional core of the students. That's very telling. And he still hasn't come clean with her. So he feels even after that encouragement, he's not going to tell his own story. It's too painful. And in a way, he's carrying a plant up the stairs and he starts crying. It was a very subtle moment. He weeps. And that's it's an African violet. And that term, that kind of plant came up earlier, where it's about putting color back into the room. And in a way, Claire is equivalent to the plant. Talk to people, reach out, appeal to them, connect with them through color, through life. And that's when the classroom scene, this is a fabulous scene where the class begins to talk for the first time, really talk about the suicide. And it starts out with a heavyset boy, I forget his name. And no one yet discusses, no one fingers Simon for it. And then Simon gets up and he starts squabbling with Alice. And then he admits that, yeah, I made up the kiss because she hugged me and I didn't like it. Right? He was having trouble at home, remember, and that's why she began tutoring him. So this was a disturbed, traumatized, injured kid in some way who needed somebody else. And Martine's expressive affection and the concern she showed for him in private tutoring reminded him how uncaring his own parents were, made him angry. So he wanted her to go away because he hated his own anger. So he made up this story to get her dismissed or to drive a wedge between them. It was too much for an 11-year-old to handle. And then he finally admits he blames himself for her suicide. And even though others, I forget who says it in the classroom, that she was hurting before then, that she was suicidal, not because of him. He was not the straw that broke the camel's back, but he blames himself.
It was another teacher who told him.
It was another teacher, yeah. Was it the psychologist or Claire?
No,
psychologist.
Somebody else.
It's off camera. It's off camera, right? So,
but you
again,
see, Jim, excuse me, but you see that the parents who wanted to silence it, now don't talk about it because it'll traumatize the children.
Right.
Well, there's truth in that, and there's huge non-truth in that. The non-truth being that the silence is what eats at people. The inability to express a conflict, keeping it within you, finding no resolution, finding no one to talk to about it at all. That is much more harmful than what that boy Simon did. And you think it's my fault. And then the teacher goes over to him with his arm touching the boy. Absolutely necessary. I agree with Risa completely that we made a mistake when we told teachers not to touch children, not to pat a shoulder. That can solve a whole day for a child, a teacher's hand on their shoulder. We can't not touch children. We must. But apart from that, this boy had an opportunity to speak out his innermost conflicting feelings that he was at fault for her death, which is so hideous for any child or adult to carry. So therefore, people who push silence, don't talk about it, expressing it is bad. If you talk about it, you'll be more traumatized. I think they're absolutely wrong.
Well, we try and legislate this issue of touching. We try and legislate with rules that will handle any situation that comes up. But you can't write the script in advance. And, it's like laws need to be very nuanced, and they often are not, because they exclude the situation where a hug or a pat on the shoulder is absolutely what the child needs. And we have to empower the teachers to use that discretion, not to suppress it, their sense of what a child needs. And then Lazhar has this beautiful speech where he talks about what school is. And the conclusion of the speech is, school is where you give life. It's not where you hold back. And this is his great lesson to all the other teachers and to the students. It's kind of over their heads at that point, but the point is he says it and we hear it. And then there's a shot of him looking at the picture of his wife. And that's our transition to go into the second hearing at immigration, where they say, another great bureaucracy managed to turn up some truth. Oh, it very much was a terrorist attack. It wasn't meant to be aimed at anybody else but your wife and child, your children. So you need protection. If we sent you back to Algeria, you could be tortured. These are all the conventions built into the French law to grant asylum to somebody. He's very pleased with that. And then we go into the classroom again, and Alice's mother takes her to school and says, "Thank you so much for being her rock. Well, I was away a lot and she really needed somebody and you were there for her." And he's very much touched by that. Then Simon and Alice reconcile. She goes over to him against the wall and they kind of grin to each other because the dam has been broken. So, Simon released everything that was troubling him, made a public confession of his guilt, as misplaced as it was, and she still accepts him, and they're willing to be friends again. Then a very important scene happens. It's the second to last scene in the movie, where he reports to the principal. She's called him in, and she says, "I know you're a refugee. I knew from the first day. They caught us in this deception. You must leave. We'll send your belongings with you. Go home now." And he pleads with her. And this kind of humanizes her. He says, "No, don't send me home today. Let me finish out the day with them." And she caves and she lets him do that. And why? What does he say? He says, "Martine never said goodbye to them. So let me say goodbye to them or they'll be doubly wounded." And, the guy has a way of bringing it home. And then this is a stroke of genius. He he says, "I'll never talk about the suicide or death again." So instead he reads a fable that is a metaphor for the suicide and grief and loving someone who's gone, about the everlasting quality of love and memory. Because remember those who loved you, just like you remember your love for them. It's a lovely fable that he wrote. And then there's that scene where the classroom empties and Alice is left behind and she runs to him and they embrace, and that's the last scene in the movie. So everybody wins, everybody loses, it's like, it's not changing the world, but Alice is healed somewhat. The students are healed somewhat. He's out of a job, but at least he's gets citizenship to Canada, and the teacher will manage, she'll land somewhere. And And that's it. So it ends with a whimper, not a bang, but we've really come a long way with it. And, it goes back to that scene where Simon, the most emotional scene in the movie, remarkable from an 11-year-old boy. It just tears your heart out because it's so fully and truthfully felt. So I'm sorry I didn't bring this film to you sooner, but it really it reached me, and I now see why it was a Best Picture nominee. Brad, are you raising your hand?
Yeah, well, first of all, Jim, I want to thank you because I absolutely love the movie. And I would not have seen it had it not been for you. So thank you again. Getting back to this issue of the importance of talking about these things, it's where that's made so clear to us is when we see this misconception that this little boy has as to why he feels guilty about this death, because on Thursdays it was his day to bring the milk, and therefore when she killed herself, it was directed at him. Of course, that's not why people kill themselves. So, I mean, he in his mind, he had concocted this story for, why this happened. And it's not until that's aired that you can begin to deal with it and to explain that, no, that's not why people kill themselves.
He'd been traumatized before that too, because everybody knew the story of the hug and the kiss that didn't happen. So they made him feel bad about himself for making that up. And he put two and two together that she must have been doing this to punish me because she knew I'd discover the body. It's very poignant, but it's so easy to understand how a child would think that way. We think that way sometimes. We take so much on ourselves, whereas it's just, and one of the morals themes of the movie is you can't make sense of any death. We never know. Reese, you're frozen or you're saluting me?
Just kind of raising my hand two different ways at the same time. The interesting thing for me is that I disagree with this because I don't think she was innocent in choosing Thursday. And I think that there was some truth in what pushed her over the edge. That's why we hang on to that story, because like with a lot of secrets, there's truth in there. There's truth. It's believable. It's not why she committed suicide, but we never know what is it that pushes the person to do it at the end. Actually,
it's a trigger.
Carry it out. It's a trigger.
It unsettled her.
But I don't think the Thursday was accidental.
Okay.
Accidental. The other thing I want to say about teaching and being trained as a teacher, there is a philosophy among teachers that you really can't be taught to be a teacher. It has to be in you. And in Massachusetts, I have been teaching for years in different kinds of settings. And then it was time for me to teach in the public school. And they put me in the public school ahead of time while I was taking these 3 courses that were required by the state at the same time. But I had teaching experience, lots of it, but I had never taken a teaching class. And I took the 3 classes within 1 semester at Worcester State College and learned nothing. I could have written the books, but he's the example. And also when you get into college, you're not being taught by teachers who have teaching credentials at all. You're being taught by people who have who have skill in a particular area, like mathematics,
Yeah.
and they teach it, or English, or whatever it is, but they never had teaching skills. And you still get some fabulous teachers in college, and you get some weak teachers in college.
Okay, so let's make it personal then, on a granular level. What made you such a good teacher with only 3 useless classes behind you?
I was thrown into teaching as a graduate student. The first year I started graduate work, I was given an assignment as a teaching assistant, but it was to teach doctors, physicians who had retired, who needed to get classes in biostatistics in order to get certified to become insurance people, to take testing. I stood up in front of a class of people who were 65 and older, and I taught them statistics. Nobody taught me how to teach. I loved it from the beginning.
That's what I wanted to know, is what made you able to do that, and perhaps not some statistician who did it less well.
I have absolutely no idea. I don't know. It felt right. It felt good. I was young and stupid, and would do whatever I was supposed to do. If that was part of being in graduate school, that was part of being in graduate school. It's still true today. They become teacher assistants. What the heck is that? They're teaching before they've never had classes in teaching. You either love it and you respond to it, or you don't. And all the classes in the world aren't going to help you. But
Jeff, how do you feel about that? Okay, point taken. Jeff?
I agree with pretty much with what Risa is saying here. I just want to ask one question. Was it my imagination, or was the idea of the chrysalis a metaphor that kept reappearing?
Yeah.
And the idea of leaving the cocoon and flying away, which gave me a sense that that's what the teacher did at the end, as well as the little girl, that they were somehow both kind of freed from a trap they were both in.
Excellent.
You're right, except that the chrysalis burns in the fire on the tree in his fable. And that is Martine, the teacher. But we always remember the butterfly to be, because we loved it and we knew it was going to be beautiful. So it's a double symbol in that way. That's how I read it.
Excellent.
Okay, so let's move on. It's 8:44. Anybody else want to have last word? Yeah.
I just want to ask a question about the scene where we see him drinking wine. I wasn't quite sure how to read that. I mean, his first name, Bashir, am I correct in sort of assuming that he's probably Muslim?
Oh, from Algeria? Definitely.
Well, not necessarily.
Well, it could be a French
There were
Catholic.
lots of Pied Noir.
Christian.
There were
There's about
lots of
1% of Algeria that's
no. At the time, there were many Algerians of French descent who were Christian. So I'm assuming he was Muslim, but yet we see him drinking wine, which of course an observant Muslim would not be doing. So is that again a way of showing his that he's more assimilated, part of the assimilation theme.
He certainly assimilated, and the French, look, there's a wine culture in Algeria and Morocco, very Muslim nations, because of the French influence and the Spanish influences just across the Strait of Gibraltar. So it's there in the culture for 100 years, maybe more. And, less observant Muslims do consume alcohol. Look at the Indians, and Eastern Indians. So I can't make too much of that. I think I looked at the alcohol and I said, he's nervous with her, so he's willingly taking a second glass. There's something socially stressful about that environment. That's how I looked at it. But, we're both right. It whatever it means, the point of the situation is that he doesn't get that she's really interested in him. And because she's this model, she's teaching more the way he'd like to teach, because she's connecting with the students on that personal level. Okay, so couple questions looking forward. The next class discussion is August 3rd, Thursday night, 7:30. You know, with all this talk about Ukraine and Russia and nuclear war, and I have been thinking for many months about a couple of films. One is Dr. Strangelove. Now, how many of you saw it when we were kids?
For a long time ago.
Wasn't a kid, but I saw it.
You were, I'll tell you, my first time I saw it was I went to a double feature in Cleveland at the Art House, right? And it was Dr. Strangelove and Smiles of a Summer Night, the Bergman lighter film. Nobody laughed. Through two movies, nobody laughed because they thought it was high art and it wasn't polite, you know, it was like an art museum. And it was very confusing to me. And I watched it a year ago or so, and we howled when we saw it. There are moments in that film that are just outrageously funny. And that's Terry Southern, who wrote it with Kubrick. So I thought that might fit in with our saber rattling from Russia these days, if you wanted to see it. But it is an older film, but it's so satirical. You know, with Oppenheimer coming out, is why I thought of it this week. And there's an article in the LA Times today about, is it LA Times or New York Times? I can't remember which. It said Hollywood never made a proper film about the bomb. Couldn't bring itself to do it. And didn't cite Dr. Strangelove at all, which is like 1961 or 64. And I thought that was a great omission, because that dealt with it better than all the Hollywood epics that tried to talk about Oppenheimer, or like the pilot. One film was on the pilot of the Enola Gay, the plane that dropped the bomb. You know, it's just peripheral. And it's like this film, like Lazhar, we as a culture have a hard time telling the truth to ourselves and confronting what we must understand about our own history to move forward. So that's been on my mind. Maybe we'll wait until some of us have seen Oppenheimer. It may inform our discussion of that. There's another film that I just saw called The Human Stain, based on the Philip Roth novel, starring Anthony Hopkins and Michelle Kidman.
I'll watch it.
Right there. It's very steamy. And she was very young, but it's about the age difference, because he's 65 and she's 28 or something, you know. And it's a typical Philip Roth story about a stubborn guy, but it's different because this is a story about a man who was born into a Black family and pretended, because he could pass, that he was Jewish instead. And he'd have advantages to be Jewish, but not if they knew he were Black. And this lie he has lived finally catches up with him late in life and devastates him. And he befriends a young Philip Roth, Nathan Zuckerman, who's always the Roth stand-in. They're called the Zuckerman trilogy. The 3 novels that include Zuckerman about, it's like Diary of the Artist as a Young Man for Roth. Only it's like Diary of an Egotist as a Young Man, but that depends on your feelings about Roth. It's very intense, and it has a lot to do with assimilation. And again, like Simon is withholding this terrible secret that's tearing him apart, Hopkins is also withholding the secret his whole life. He's never really told but 2 people, and women. And he was quite the ladies' man. And it catches up with him, not in terms of any one thing that he does, but that he's lived a lie. And he tries to make up for it with his parental. It's partly a parental relationship. It's also a sexual relationship with her. and she has her own troubled past. Her ex-husband blames her for the deaths of their two children. Is played by Ed Harris, who's always wonderful, and he's a great psychopath. You can imagine that. I'd really like to show that, as long as people are comfortable watching it and could find some meaning in it. I just watched it 2 nights ago, and I was very moved. It's not with a resolution necessarily. It's not about the resolution. It's about the consequences of not speaking the truth to yourself. So that's on my radar. How do people feel about that? Not that you have to choose between Human Stain and Strangelove. Strangelove, I'll definitely withhold till. Do people plan on seeing Oppenheimer?
Not till
By
it
the
comes on
way,
TV.
Well, it's going to be a couple of months. It's Christopher Nolan. It's going to be a big hit.
Right.
It's a gorgeous looking movie. I saw the trailer, as did many other people. And the key thing is, Oppenheimer was Jewish. Didn't make a big deal of it, but he did donate funds to bring Jewish scientists over from Germany to the US. His nemesis in the government was a physicist who had become a policy advisor named Strauss, but he pronounced it Strauss. Another Jew who was really closeted as a Jew, like Robert Moses was, the New York City planner who built low bridges so the blacks couldn't go to the beach on buses because the buses couldn't get through the tunnels. So it's a religious struggle as well. I really want to see what Nolan does with that dichotomy between these two personalities. I can justify it with a Wilshire Boulevard Film Society and say it's a Jewish film. It's not, but I want to see how it's dealt with, because it's really about who you are and what you must do. And after the A-bomb was successful and ended the war, Oppenheimer came out against further atomic weapons research. And Strauss, as well as General Grove, wanted to develop it further into a more powerful H-bomb. And Oppenheimer came out against it. And then Oppenheimer was accused of being a communist and had his security clearance revoked by General Grove. So it became America was on trial, just like the Red Scare. Just like Fauci's on trial by the right-wing nut jobs. It will resonate a lot with us. So we'll say Strangelove for that. We don't have to do the other A-bomb movies because none of them rose to the level of Strangelove. So maybe it'll be The Human Stain. You can see it if you want now. It's told in and out of time. There are flashbacks to his past, her past. Mostly it's his past. And it's very well directed by Robert Benton, who did Kramer versus Kramer and some other films. He started out as a commercial director, and sometimes his touch is cold, but this is a hot-blooded, passionate film. And you have to keep your eyes on the prize because she's very mean. Nicole Kidman is very mean to him. Yet he has the maturity to take it because he needs her. And she stays with him because, one, he doesn't strike back the way her maniac husband did, but also because she needs him. And again, she can't express why she needs him so much. So it's a psychologically very powerful film. We'll get to it eventually. It's too good not to watch. By the way, we saw another film about the college students, the Jewish college student who, takes up with a blonde girl who later kills herself. And he didn't know how mean he was being to her. What was that called? Not Indigenous, but there's a one-word title. James Schamus directed it. A very sensitive film. We really liked it. And one of the lesser-known Roth novels. But I'll bring that out again when we see The Human Stain, when that'll be. So it's August 3rd, 2 weeks from tonight. And if we're lucky, we'll be able to do 3 films in August, unless you're all going to the North Pole or the South Pole during the heat, or on vacation like a lot of people are. So I'm glad you liked this film. I was a little worried, but when I saw it today, I said, no, people are going to love it because it's too good. but it's quiet, and it's not understated. It's one of those, understated films that work because it's so understated. We talked about what happens when there's no music in a film, and there wasn't much in this. It's because it pulls you in as the viewer. You fill in the blanks that your own story receiving mind needs to hear to help you move the version of the story you are receiving. And understated films have a way of doing it. We've seen many other understated films from China and Korea and Japan and India. Remember the Photograph, where it's very little is said about what's really going on, but you're very up to speed on what's going on with all the players. And that's how you have to watch this film. But there are some dramatic scenes in it. Okay, enough of my soapboxing. Thank you for tonight.
Thank you.
Glad you enjoyed the film. We'll see you in
Thank
2
you.
weeks. All right, bye.
And what is it? The Human Stain?
I can't promise you, but I'm leaning that way. But I've been seeing like 2 or 3 films a day now, and I'm blowing through the possibilities really fast. But I'll let you know more than the Tuesday before. I'm sorry I was late this week. Okay, take care, everybody.
Take
Thanks,
care.
Jim. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thursday nights, this is